Good evening, my name is Steve Pereira. Welcome to Quedia on Ment TV, where we explore all things art and culture. We're talking again to C.S. Pacat, the Melbourne publishing phenomenon, whose new book, King's Rising, has just made the bestseller list. We're talking to C.S. about all things writing and publishing and becoming a writing phenomenon. Welcome back, C.S. Pacat.
Thank you.
So I wanted to talk to you, again, following up on the discussion, is this gay sex slave political fantasy thriller. But one of the differences you've done in this genre is we've moved from the grand narrative, from the search, the Lord of the Rings type fantasy, into more personal stories. So this is about people rather than journeys. And how did that happen? Are you now breaking genre? Are you changing the landscape of genre writing?
I feel like the landscape of genre writing is in a moment of change currently. So first of all, I feel like some of those classic like Tolkien-style narratives of like the quest narrative already started to break down. There is some amazing, my favorite ever quest fantasy is probably the 1980s movie The Labyrinth, because she goes on a quest, but she's not traveling in a straight line. In fact, when she tries to go in a straight line at the beginning, she can't. So she's sort of just going more deeply into one place, and it is about like a character dynamic, but her learning something about herself and interacting with another character.
But I have to say that's kind of really historical, because we're going back to Canterbury Tales.
Right, right.
You know, which is stories about journeys and development and people meeting each other and growth. Right.
So there's lots of different ways, I guess, that you can express a quest. And I think that more recently we're looking at more and more sophisticated ways of telling that story. I think also we're having a wider conversation at the moment about diversity in genre, because we've understood that genre fiction is important. That's the place where our myth making happens. And we're starting to ask ourselves or see the importance of creating myths and aspirational selves for all types of people, not just the same story with the same characters over and over again.
You mentioned in publishing, with King's Writing and some of the early books, but when they published in other countries, they weren't published necessarily in the same genre.
Right.
So what was the genres that they were published under?
So everything ranging from commercial literature to romance to fantasy.
Really?
Yeah.
So is that a plus, that your book will transcend genres, or do you then dilute your audience space because they feel like you haven't quite stuck to the groove?
I suppose I'm not sure. That might be one for the audience or the publishers to answer. But I think publishing categories exist as a way of a shorthand to explain a book to the market. So hopefully it's connecting in different ways to different markets, yeah.
But also that's the sort of genres, then you get the diehards who will only follow their genre and they want stuff in that genre, and they're a true fan base, like, you know, the Game of Thrones, the original Stories of Fire and Ice, has got a very strong fan base that's very dedicated to that particular format, and they don't want it changed. So do you breathe a kind of closedness around it then that you can't experiment?
I think one of the things that's been so exciting is that it has managed to find kind of like a wider audience and a wider appeal. I think Game of Thrones is probably a good case study, because for many years, like all through the 90s when it was being written, it was corralled off into the fantasy genre and only fantasy enthusiasts were reading it. But post the TV series, I think people who don't necessarily read fantasy have given it a go and realised, like, oh, this is a really exciting story that I'm really enjoying.
Is that an irritant for you that it keeps, because of Game of Thrones is so popular in the popular imagination, that everything now around the fantasy realm is compared to Game of Thrones, and that becomes a sort of a benchmark? Is that a positive or negative thing?
I think it's both. I think it's positive in that it is a gateway drug, if you will, for mainstream readers into the fantasy genre. But I think it's a negative in another sense, in that Game of Thrones is very, very specific. It's got a very specific lens on medieval fantasy. It was written as a kind of anti-Tolkien. So instead of this beautiful pastoral escapist fantasy, it's real medieval brutalism. And
I love the idea of medieval brutalism.
yeah, and you know, good deeds are not necessarily rewarded, and it's also in some ways quite how can I put it, like hyper masculine in a very specific definition of that word masculine. So you know, there's a lot of kind of exciting fantasy that's doing other things in that genre as well. So that's the way that it can be a distraction.
Now, one thing, just going back to the audience engagement and the way that you engage with in an online space with the audience, but apparently now they've now groups of people are now writing up their own narratives. They've got your characters, they're following their own narratives. They've developed. So this has taken a whole life of its own beyond you, or outside of the scope of what. How does that fit in with?
I think the internet has always been a place where people create. There's like a lot of creativity that happens there, and there's cultures of fan art and fan fiction that spring up around other works. So for me, that's really exciting. I love all of that, that changing and mutating of texts that happens there. I think it plays a really important function. It diversifies what can seem like a narrative monoculture at times. It's used to queer texts. It's used to insert female power fantasies into spaces where perhaps there isn't a lot of like female representation. So it's also really exciting to me that my books are like sparking creative imagination in other people as well. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that of Fahrenheit 451, particularly the movie where they were burning books, where they've got these television sets that take up in space against the wall, but you can actually write yourself into the scene. You can you get a scripted dialogue and you write yourself in the narrative, and everybody else watches you. So there is that sense of active participation and engagement.
Right.
Are you, as a writer, in your garret, writing by candlelight, eating cat food? Is that an inspiration, or is it kind of scary to have this whole group of people out there who are adding their voices to your voice?
It's absolutely an inspiration. I think I feel really privileged that there are enough people that like the books enough that they want to spend time imaginatively with my characters and in my world. So I don't necessarily find it. Yeah, I don't find it scary. I think it only enlarges the universe for them.
I think it's interesting. I think the notion of authorship and writing has changed dramatically now. It's now communal activity. But thank you so much for being with us and joining us again. King's Rising is the book. It's available at your bookstore, or I'm sure online at Amazon. Get reading and get involved, because you can, as we've talked about, you can add to the narrative. Thank you, C.S. Pacat. Thank you for watching us on Quedia on Bent TV.